Welcome to the stillness between stars. Tonight, let us begin with a garden where beasts speak in riddles, and every silence holds a truth waiting to bloom. There once was a quiet valley, nestled between low, rounded hills brushed with tufts of soft, sky-colored grass. These hills looked as though clouds had once rested upon them and forgotten bits of their breath behind. They swayed gently in breezes that carried no scent, only silence, and they held a hush as tender as sleep. No signs pointed the way to this place. No maps marked it, nor did any path grow worn with footprints. It was a hidden realm beyond remembering, found only by those who wandered without seeking. Beyond these hills, past a curtain of trailing willows, lay a garden unlike any other. It was not cultivated, nor did it boast rows or hedges. Instead, it lived. Trees leaned like thoughtful elders, and wildflowers bloomed in quiet corners without reason or rhythm. There was a stillness here, not emptiness, but presence. Every stone and stem seemed to listen. Every leaf held a dream. Into this hush stepped a wanderer. Their boots were worn with years of wandering, their satchel faded by sun and rain. They came without purpose, yet felt as though they had arrived where they were always meant to be. Beneath their feet, moss grew thick and cool, whispering softness with each step. The light in the garden was neither morning nor afternoon, just a gentle gold, like memory made warm. Near the bend of a stream that spoke in quiet trickles, a fox lay beneath a fern. His fur was the color of autumn's first sigh, and on one ear, he wore a small golden ring. A charm dangled from it, a question mark, glinting in the hush. He did not speak, not aloud. He only blinked, slowly. Then, without hurry, he rose and turned. The wanderer followed. And somewhere in the branches above, the leaves seemed to listen. The fox walked with a lightness that did not disturb the earth, as though he had long ago made peace with the weight of his presence. His tail swept the moss in slow arcs, and the charm on his ear chimed so faintly it could have been imagined. Around them, the garden breathed, slowly, sweetly, filling the air with scents of damp bark, sun-warmed petals, and old rain. They passed beneath arches of flowering vines and over stones wrapped in velvet moss. Now and then, a bird would flutter past, its wings silent, its eyes full of secrets. A dragonfly circled above a small pond where silver fish moved like drifting thoughts. At last, the fox paused beside a crooked stone where a beetle lay sleeping, its shell dusted with golden pollen. He turned to the wanderer and blinked again, and this time, his voice came, not as sound, but as a ripple through the air, a thought-shaped whisper that gently curled inside the mind. What grows shorter the longer it is watched? The riddle hung there, soft as mist. The wanderer stood still. They did not rush to answer. In the garden of thoughtful beasts, riddles were not challenges but lanterns, meant to be carried, pondered, warmed by the hand. A breeze stirred the leaves above. Time passed, not quickly, not slowly, but fully. Somewhere, a petal fell. Somewhere, water kissed stone. And as the golden light shifted, the answer began to rise in the wanderer's heart like a leaf rising to the surface of a pond. Patience. Though no word was spoken, the fox blinked once more and nodded. He turned again, and the path resumed. Above them, the trees whispered nothing, and everything. Beyond a grove where the air grew especially still, the path opened into a quiet glade. Here, the trees bent low, their branches arching like cathedral ceilings, their leaves filtering the golden hush into strands of sleepy light. In the center of this grove was a pool, wide, round, and perfectly still. Not a ripple danced upon it. Not a sound disturbed its surface. It reflected the sky above as though the sky itself had lain down to rest upon the water. Beside the pool, resting half in shadow and half in sun, was a turtle. His shell bore the green and gray of mossy stones, and lines traced across it like the soft wrinkles of an old poem. His eyes were the color of dusk after rain, gentle, thoughtful, and quiet with long-remembered things. He blinked once as the fox approached, then slowly turned his gaze toward the wanderer. The fox did not speak. He sat upon his haunches, curled his tail neatly, and waited. The turtle lifted his head, just enough to acknowledge the newcomers, and then lowered it once more. He seemed to be watching the pool, but not truly watching, rather, listening. As though the water carried thoughts too soft for words. The wanderer stood very still, unsure if they should speak. But in this garden, stillness was not awkward. It was expected. The breeze here was soft and round, and even the birds dared not sing too loudly. After a long pause, the turtle finally spoke, not with words, not even with thought, but with presence. A gentle kind of knowing unfurled from him, wrapping around the wanderer like a shawl of twilight. Then came his question, slow as a falling leaf. What weighs nothing, but can drown the strongest swimmer? Again, the riddle was not sharp or pressing. It came like a sigh, soft and slow and meant to be held in the heart, not solved with the mind. The wanderer sat upon a stone. They watched the surface of the pool, how it held the sky without a ripple, how it seemed endless in its stillness. Around the edges, delicate reeds swayed without touching. A dragonfly hovered in place, its wings unmoving in the reflection. Silence. The answer came not with a voice, but with understanding. The turtle blinked, very slowly. A look passed between him and the fox, not approval, not pride, but something older. A quiet agreement. As if they were caretakers of questions rather than judges of answers. The turtle turned his gaze once more to the pool. The fox rose, graceful as breath, and began to walk again. The wanderer followed. Behind them, the pool remained as it was, holding the sky in its stillness. And beneath that surface, the silence carried on, deep, kind, and without end. Beyond the curling branches of a quiet grove, the path opened into a small clearing where the air itself seemed to pause. In the center of this circle of stillness lay a wide, round pool, so smooth it held the sky like a mirror, and so silent it seemed to breathe. The trees leaned inward, their leaves filtering sunlight into ribbons of gold and green. Flowers grew in hush-colored clusters along the edge, their petals opening without sound. The hush here was not empty, it was complete, like the moment before a thought is born. Beside the pool sat a turtle. His shell was colored with shades of moss and riverstone, his eyes deep and slow as dusk. He rested with his head lowered just slightly, facing the water, as if listening to it dream. He did not look up when the fox arrived. He did not need to. He already knew. The wanderer, unsure at first, stepped softly closer. The fox sat and curled his tail once more. Still the turtle waited, until the silence grew long enough to bloom. Then came a voice, not loud, not even voiced, but shaped like a breeze through tall grass. What weighs nothing, but can drown the strongest swimmer? The riddle floated between them. The wanderer sat down slowly, knees brushing the moss. They watched the pool, its surface unbroken, its depth unknown. There was no ripple, no sound, no reflection that moved. Only stillness. Time passed. Not quickly, not slowly, but completely. And when the answer arrived, it came like a feather settling. Silence. The turtle blinked once. The fox's eyes glimmered, not with praise, but peace. The pool shimmered in reply, and all was still. The path curved gently away from the pool, weaving beneath flowering trees that let their petals fall like sleepy thoughts. The light deepened as they walked, becoming the soft blue of approaching twilight, the hour when stars begin to remember themselves. Soon, they reached a tree unlike the others. It stood tall in a circle of grass that shimmered faintly, as if brushed by starlight. Its bark gleamed silver in places, and from its branches hung threads of silk spun between dreams. It was called, by those who knew such things, the dreaming tree. Perched upon a hanging thread was a moth. Its wings were delicate tapestries, painted with soft pastels, lavender, pearl, and faded gold. When it fluttered, the air stirred with the scent of something distant, sun-warmed paper, faded memories, and sugar on snow. It laughed without sound, the joy held only in the flutter of its wings. The fox stopped and looked up. The moth spun in a slow, gentle circle. Then, it came to rest and spoke, not in riddles, but in warmth. Would you like to learn how to float? The wanderer blinked, surprised by the softness of the question. The moth fluttered once more and landed on a low branch, its wings folding like curtains drawn at night. Floating, it continued, is not flying. It is not running away. It is the art of letting go, just enough to remain. The wind passed through the branches like a sigh. The moth offered no riddle, only this, to sit beneath the tree, to breathe in its dreaming hush, and let the world be light. So the wanderer sat, closed their eyes, and floated, not above, not away, but within. And the moth shimmered softly, and the tree whispered, and the stars began to bloom. The light was different now. It did not grow darker, but deeper, like stepping into the quiet hour between thought and sleep. The trees thinned, and the sky revealed itself in shades of soft violet and dove gray. The path wound downward into a hollow, where stones were smooth and pale, worn by more than rain. Here, the garden offered a new kind of silence. Not the hush of stillness or sleep, but the silence of seeing. Of knowing something without needing to speak it. A stream traced its way alongside the path, narrow and clear, with water so still it mirrored the sky perfectly. It made no sound, though it moved. Along its surface, the reflections of leaves and branches drifted as if they had lives of their own. The wanderer paused. There, in the water, they saw their reflection, but it did not match the moment. The reflected self stood differently, turned its head when they did not, and once, even blinked too slowly. The fox watched this quietly, his golden eyes half closed, as though reading the pages of a silent book. Behind them, the moth spun a tiny circle in the air, leaving a trace of shimmer that faded softly. Then the fox finally spoke, with a thought like a thread of wind. Not all reflections are bound to mirrors. The wanderer knelt by the stream, reaching out gently. But the water did not ripple. Instead, it held their image like a story being remembered. In that still self, they saw something that felt both distant and familiar, a version of them who had not spoken in many years, who listened more than they knew, who waited, not for answers, but for understanding. A shadow moved beside the reflection. But no one stood there. The wanderer blinked. The shadow remained, not ominous, only different. A gentle echo of something carried, regret, perhaps. Or memory. A version of a self that had wandered away long ago. And yet, it smiled. Not with lips or eyes, but with presence. The moth landed on the wanderer's shoulder. The fox rose to his feet. And together, they walked on, past the stream, past the shadow, past the reflection. Behind them, the water shimmered once, and then was still again. The path narrowed once more, and the moss beneath their feet gave way to smooth, flat stone. These stones were wide and cool, shaded by tall trees that stood still as statues, their branches barely moving in the hush. The stones were pale gray, but not lifeless. They pulsed with a quiet shimmer, as if moonlight had settled in their depths long ago and never left. Some bore carvings, faint and weathered, spirals, leaf shapes, lines that bent like rivers. Others were plain, but when the wanderer stepped upon them, they felt something stir, deep in the soles of their feet, and deeper still in the heart. The fox walked slowly here. The moth did not fly ahead, but fluttered in slow circles, staying close. And the turtle, though left behind, seemed to echo in the stillness, his presence lingering like the memory of dusk. The wanderer paused beside a particularly large stone, one etched with a curve like a question mark. They reached out, brushing their fingers across its smooth face. A warmth answered. Not heat, but remembrance. From the stone came a sensation, not sound, not word, but a feeling that unfurled gently, a path once considered, never taken. A choice once held like a coin between two fingers, then slipped silently back into the pocket. The wanderer blinked. Another stone pulsed softly nearby. This one held a different shape, like a turning leaf. It, too, spoke in feeling, something beautiful, once left behind, never mourned. The fox sat quietly, watching with knowing eyes. The moth landed gently on the edge of a stone, and where its wings touched, the surface brightened faintly, just enough to suggest that even what is forgotten can still glow for a moment, when noticed with care. Here, the garden offered no riddles, only echoes, and the understanding that sometimes, to move forward, one must first sit with what has been past. So the wanderer sat, not to regret, but to remember. And the stones, old and kind, remembered with them. The path narrowed gently, and the moss beneath their steps gave way to a pale, smooth floor of stone. These stones, though worn by time, shimmered faintly with a light that did not seem to come from sun or sky. It was the kind of glow that lingers in places where thought has settled for a long, long while. Each stone was wide and round, their edges softened by silence. Some bore faded carvings, swirls like wind and water, leaves mid-fall, the curl of a sleeping creature. Others were bare but hummed softly, as though the stories they held had sunk too deep for the eye, but not too far for the heart to feel. The wanderer walked more slowly now. Each step brought a hush of memory, like touching a page still warm with the hand that had written it. There was no fear here, only a stillness that watched kindly. A stone beneath their foot whispered of a moment once paused too long. Another murmured of a word never said. They did not speak in pain, but in gentle acknowledgement, as if to say, "We remember. That is enough." The fox paused beside a stone that bore a mark like a spiral folding into itself. His eyes gleamed, quiet, golden, unblinking. The moth landed on a nearby root, wings folded like soft thoughts. Neither spoke. The wanderer knelt, placing a hand on the cool stone. From within rose the memory of a choice once held and released. A path that could have been, now wrapped in moss and time. It did not ache. It pulsed with peace. For a while, they sat together, the fox, the moth, and the one who wandered, until the hush around them deepened once more, and the stones, content with being seen, fell silent again. The path widened, unfolding into a quiet orchard where the trees were low and gentle, their trunks bent like old friends leaning close to whisper. Their branches were laden with round fruits, soft as dusk and pale as candlelight. The orchard glowed, though no sun lit the sky, only the gentle, living light of the fruit themselves. The wanderer stepped between the trees. Each fruit seemed to watch them, not with eyes, but with attention. Some pulsed faintly when approached. Others remained still, hidden in shadow, waiting for no one in particular. The air here was sweet and thick with thought, like rain on warm earth. Beneath one tree, the fox stopped. He turned to the wanderer and tilted his head, his golden eyes reflecting the glow. The moth fluttered in a slow circle above, drifting downward to rest on a branch heavy with fruit. From the tree, a single fruit fell. It did not thud, it landed like a whisper in the grass. Round and smooth, with a soft gleam that faded even as it was lifted. The wanderer picked it up gently. The skin was warm to the touch, and the scent was like memory, part longing, part comfort, part wind before sleep. A voice, or something close to voice, stirred in the orchard. Every fruit here holds one truth. But it may not be the one expected. The wanderer hesitated. Then, slowly, they took a small bite. The flavor was quiet, clear, like still water. Sweet, but not sugary. Faintly familiar, like a story heard in childhood. And with it came a truth, not grand, not shattering, but simple. You have always been enough. It settled into the heart like sunlight through a window. No more needed to be said. The wanderer closed their eyes, and for a moment, the orchard hummed around them. Then the fox turned again. And the path, as always, waited. The orchard faded behind them like the last notes of a lullaby, and the path grew soft once more beneath the wanderer's steps. The sky above had grown pale, neither light nor dark, but the color of thoughts unspoken. The air changed. It was still gentle, but heavier now, as though carrying something unwrapped. A breeze stirred. The leaves whispered in a new way, quieter, yet filled with meaning. The fox paused. His ears flicked once. The moth hovered in place, its wings catching the scent of rain long before it fell. Then came the first drop. It landed softly on the wanderer's sleeve, cool, clean, and without urgency. Another followed. Then another. Each one a punctuation mark on the silence, each one falling as if it had chosen its moment with care. It was a gentle rain. The kind that asked permission before touching the earth. It did not soak or sting, it soothed. It wrapped the trees in mist and softened every edge. The wanderer looked upward, eyes half closed. The sky had drawn a veil of silver, and through it came the hush of the world exhaling. The fox sat in the moss and watched the rain fall on the stones. The moth folded its wings, tucking itself beneath a leaf, humming faintly with a rhythm older than time. Then, just beyond the trees, something shimmered. A shape. Faint at first, like the memory of light, then clearer, as the rain drew it into being, a doorway. Not made of wood or stone, but of sky itself. Its edges wavered like breath on a mirror, and within it swirled a soft blue light, speckled with tiny stars. It did not promise anything. It simply was. The rain fell steady and slow, like a song meant only for those who stood still long enough to hear it. And the door waited. The doorway stood beneath a gentle arch of trees, its frame shifting like clouds in motion. It gave off no sound, no heat, no command. And yet it drew the gaze, softly, steadily, like the pull of tide on sand. The fox approached first. He did not step through, only stood beside it, as if he too were pondering the feeling that hummed low in its presence. The moth returned to the wanderer's shoulder, its wings cool from the rain, its body humming like a quiet lantern. The wanderer stepped closer. The surface of the door did not reflect, nor did it show what lay beyond. Instead, it offered a sense of invitation, gentle and wordless, the way a meadow invites rest, or a breeze invites a closed window to open. A thought drifted through the wanderer's mind. Some thresholds do not lead elsewhere. They lead inward. The rain softened. The moss around the doorway grew richer, darker, lush with new life. Droplets clung to branches like jewels. The air was filled with the scent of clean beginnings. The wanderer reached out a hand. Their fingers touched the light, cool, soft, like dipping into the first moment of sleep. A warmth followed, not in the skin, but in the heart, the feeling of being welcomed, exactly as one was. The moth glowed faintly. The fox blinked slowly, his tail sweeping the moss. Then, with breath held like a secret, the wanderer stepped through. Not into another place, but into stillness itself. And the door, shimmering gently, folded back into sky. The world on the other side of the sky door was not brighter or stranger, it was deeper. The path did not lead through woods or orchards anymore. It led through air that shimmered faintly with what felt like dreams, dreams unspoken, dreams left behind, dreams still forming like dew on the edge of morning. The ground was soft, not with moss or stone, but with a silken texture, as if the earth had become memory itself. Shapes drifted in the distance, too soft to be trees, too tall to be mist. The air did not smell of rain or earth now, but of lavender and old parchment, of sun-warmed feathers and distant lullabies. The wanderer walked slowly, each step cradled by silence. Behind them, the fox followed, and beside them, the moth hovered like a thought that had chosen to stay close. Neither spoke. Words had grown too solid for this place. Instead, the garden began to sing. Not aloud, not with voice, but with presence. The light sang in slow pulses of color, pale rose, silver blue, golden gray. The air sang with the memory of leaves rustling, water flowing, and soft breathing in sleep. The very space hummed with a lullaby meant for no one, and yet it belonged to all. The wanderer felt their steps lighten. Not as if they floated, but as though the weight they carried had quietly set itself down along the path. Worries, regrets, names, and questions, they did not vanish, but they grew still, folded themselves like linens and rested in the hush. They looked to the fox. He blinked slowly, his golden eyes glowing faintly now. The moth circled once above, then settled again on the wanderer's shoulder. They walked on, through dreamlight, through breath, through the softness that lives in between every heartbeat. And the garden watched with kindness. At the end of the dreaming path, the light deepened. It folded in on itself gently, like a curtain drawn slowly at the end of a long day. The path opened into a circle, not of stone or trees, but of presence. There were no walls. There were no boundaries. Only the feeling of arrival. The air grew still once more, but it was not empty. It was full. Full of everything that had been seen and heard, thought and felt. Full of riddles and truths, of patience and silence, of dreams and soft echoes. The garden had gathered all of it, not to keep, but to offer. The wanderer stood quietly at its center. There were no gates, no voices now. The fox came to their side and sat, tail curled neatly, his breath slow and even. The moth took its place atop the wanderer's head, like a crown made of light and softness. And the garden, for the first time, spoke. Not in words, but in feeling. A warm embrace of thought, a knowing that wrapped the heart without pressure. The message was simple. You are part of this. Not separate. Not visitor or guest. Part of the hush. Part of the riddles. part of the path and the pause and the soft unfolding of stillness. The wanderer's eyes shimmered, not with tears, but with light. The light of understanding, the light of being seen. The garden grew quiet again, but it was a different quiet now. Not the quiet of waiting. The quiet of peace. The fox closed his eyes. The moth hummed faintly. The wanderer breathed in. And somewhere, just beneath the surface of the moment, something smiled. The garden did not vanish. It did not fade or shift or slip away. It simply settled, like snow upon stone, like silence into a song's last note. The light remained soft, the air still warm with knowing. But the moment had passed, as all moments must, not with regret, but with rest. The wanderer stood for a while longer in the circle of presence. They did not need to ask where the path had led, nor wonder what would come next. The garden had not given answers, it had offered space. It had unfolded like a book of poems, one gentle page at a time, and left its meaning nestled between the lines. The fox rose. His fur shimmered faintly, not with magic, but with memory. He blinked once more at the wanderer, and though he said nothing, the message was clear. You were never truly lost. The moth stirred, brushing its wings against the air like a sigh. It circled once, twice, and then disappeared into the petals of the sky, where stars bloomed one by one in silence. The garden did not ask the wanderer to stay. It did not need to. For the garden lived in every breath now, in the stillness between footsteps, in the weightless pause before a kind word, in the moment of patience that grows before understanding. It had traveled quietly into the wanderer's heart, and there it would remain, blooming gently whenever it was needed. And so, when the wanderer turned to walk back the way they came, the path unfolded naturally, soft, familiar, loving. No farewell was spoken. None was needed. The trees dipped their branches in quiet blessing. The stones shimmered once and rested. The wind curled around the ankles like a final embrace. And the garden, thoughtful and full, closed its petals with a sigh of evening. Above, the stars blinked awake, slow and kind. And somewhere, not far from sleep, a riddle echoed into stillness. What do we find when we stop seeking? A hush. A pause. A garden. High above the clouds, the wind begins to falter, and a feather falls. Join the windkeeper on a quiet quest to find what the sky has forgotten. Far above the hills and valleys, where clouds wander in silence and stars blink even in daylight, floated a kingdom made not of stone, but of wind and dream. Eralis, they called it, a city in the sky, cradled by drifting cloud islands and bridges spun from silver air. Its towers stretched like reeds into the blue, their walls shimmering with feather glass and whisper light. Floating gardens bloomed with cloud blossom and song fern, and breezes wandered gently through the quiet streets, carrying forgotten lullabies and soft laughter from long ago. Here lived the windkeeper. She was not a queen, nor a ruler of any kind. She kept no crown, only a soft cloak woven from her own feathers, pale silver and cloud blue, light as sighs. Her tower rose higher than all the rest, and there, beneath its domed roof, she kept her wind globes, glass spheres filled with sleeping breezes, stored like precious memories. Some whispered. Some sang. Others merely waited. She moved through the air like a thought drifting in sleep, humming softly to the winds, checking each globe, brushing her feathers clean. No wind stirred in Aralis unless she listened to it first. But one morning, as sunlight spilled gold through the glass ceiling, the Windkeeper found a single feather lying curled on the floor. Pale. Delicate. Her own. It had not fallen from its resting place. It had let go. And in that moment, the winds above the city sighed, not in movement, but in unease. Something had shifted. The Windkeeper moved softly to her cabinet of breezes. Each globe sat in a hollow of woven mist, cradled like a dream still unspoken. Her fingers glided over the cool glass of one after another, checking their quiet pulses. The winds inside shimmered faintly, valley wind, river wind, mountain hush, chimney drift from old stone villages. But one globe, small and dusky, with a glint of violet at its heart, was silent. The wind it once held had vanished. She turned it gently. No crack, no flaw. It was whole, but empty. The wind it once kept, a soft breeze from the western sea that carried the smell of pine and salt and starlight, was simply gone. She closed her eyes. And for the first time in many turnings of the sky, the Windkeeper felt the air grow still around her, not in calm, but in question. She moved to the great window, where gossamer curtains swayed just slightly, though no breath stirred them. Her wings opened behind her, soft, wide, beautiful, and from them, another feather slipped loose. This one fell without a sound. Far below, the towers of Aralis glinted in the light, unaware. But the Windkeeper knew, something was calling to the wind, something she could not yet hear. And if she could not hear it, she could no longer keep it. At the base of the western tower, hidden behind a curtain of trailing cloud vines, stood the Wind Archives, a vast, circular hall of whispering light. Inside, thousands of scrolls floated gently between shelves, drifting as if they remembered how to fly. Here lived the Keeper of Forgotten Breezes. He was small and bent, with hair like dandelion fluff and a cloak made from stitched wind maps. His voice was softer than a sigh, and he moved only when the breeze asked him to. The Windkeeper had known him since her earliest days, though he rarely spoke unless something was truly amiss. Today, he looked up before she spoke. 2 feathers, he murmured, without turning. And a silence in the west. The Windkeeper nodded, stepping lightly into the room. They stood together beneath a dome of skyglass, watching cloud shadows drift along the floor. She handed him the empty globe. He turned it slowly in his hands, brows furrowing as if listening to something far away. No storm, he whispered. No theft. The wind did not escape, it was called. The Windkeeper frowned. By what? He shook his head. Something old, something forgotten. It has begun again. A hush fell, deeper than quiet. Scrolls fluttered faintly above them, sensing the change. One by one, they folded themselves and floated gently to the shelves. The Wind Keeper looked at her wings. 3 more feathers had loosened. She said nothing. But inside, she felt it begin, a slow, quiet unraveling. Not of power, but of connection. And somewhere, far beyond Aralis, something called to the wind again. That night, the skies over Aralis stirred in their sleep. Soft currents wandered the spires like dreams in motion, brushing against the eaves of towers and tugging at window ledges. But the air was uncertain, no longer held, no longer full. It searched for something it couldn't name. The Wind Keeper stood at the edge of her tower, wrapped in her silver-feathered cloak. Her eyes watched the slow movement of the stars, but her thoughts drifted lower, where the wind had slipped away. A murmuring draft coiled at her feet. It was faint, barely there, like breath on glass. But it spoke, not in words, but in rhythm. A pattern. A pause. A sound like memory. The Wind Keeper knelt. She reached her hand into the air, palm open, listening with her skin. The draft curled into her fingers and stayed there, trembling slightly. It was the echo of the western breeze. But something had changed. It was thinner now. Wistful. It carried no scent, no warmth of sea or whisper of pine. It had been touched, gently, but deeply, by something that did not belong to the sky. And it was not alone. A second draft slipped in, then a third. All different. All returning, just barely, like birds who had forgotten their flight but remembered their feathers. She gathered them in silence, pressing them into her book of wind notes. And as she closed the cover, another feather, soft and white with a silver edge, fell from her wing. The night held its breath. And Aralis began to listen. For many seasons, the Wind Keeper had never stepped below the cloud line. The sky was her realm, the winds her kin. But now, with feathers loosening like dreams at dawn, and breezes vanishing into silence, she knew the answer was no longer held above. So, wrapped in her cloak of shedding silver, she stood upon the eastern balcony, where the cloud floor shimmered like opal mist, and stepped down. The fall was not sharp, nor was it fast. She descended slowly, weightless as a petal in a hush. The clouds parted, whispering against her wings. Below, the land stretched quiet and dark, stitched with forest, stone, and silver rivers that reflected the dimming sky. She passed through the middle air, where the old winds once played. But here, too, they were fading. The currents were thin, the songs incomplete. She could feel the gaps, spaces where breeze should be, now hollow and still. And then, at the edge of the drifting woodlands, she saw it. A single feather, her own, nestled in the crook of a tree. It had landed as though placed, not fallen. Around it, the leaves curled gently inward, as if they had heard something they could not understand. She reached for it. And as her fingers touched the hollow quill, a sound rose in the distance, low, resonant, and not wind. Not quite. It was calling again. Not loudly, but persistently, like a song without melody. The feather shivered in her grasp. And in the hush of the forest's breath, another breeze slipped away. The Windkeeper followed the quiet call through a patchwork of forest and misted meadow. She walked with her wings folded, her cloak trailing lightly behind her. Every few steps, a breeze brushed past, half-formed, uncertain, like it was trying to remember what it once was. The air grew stranger as she neared the grove. Not dark. Not heavy. But empty. It was the emptiness of something just removed, a space still warm from a vanished presence. The trees here stood thin and silver, and between them hung long strands of air webbing, like silk spun from breath. Within their threads, tiny glimmers flickered. She stepped carefully among them. One strand vibrated as she passed, sending out a hum like a sigh too small to be noticed. Another drifted across her hand and left a trace of cold, a breeze so faint, it no longer knew the sky. At the grove's center stood a stone. It bore no carving, no name, only a soft hollow at its crown, where feathers had gathered, hers, and others. She knelt before it. There were feathers here not of her making. Light ones, small ones, the kind once carried by distant winds. Some were broken. Others were perfect. All had come here. She touched the stone. It pulsed, not with magic, but with mourning. The wind had not been stolen. It had been drawn. Gently. Purposefully. By something lonely. And in that moment, the Windkeeper felt the wind within her stir. Not in fear, but in recognition. Evening fell slowly over the grove. The light turned to pearl, and the trees cast long, thoughtful shadows across the feather-strewn ground. The Windkeeper sat beside the stone, her hand resting upon its surface, feeling the slow, rhythmic breath of ancient air. She waited. The wind did not rise in gusts or whirl with answers. It came as a hush through the trees, a draft that curled around her ankles, wound into her hair, and pressed gently against her wings. Then, soft as an old memory, it spoke. Not with voice, but with vibration. A single name. Aeluin. The Windkeeper stilled. It had been lifetimes since that name had touched her thoughts. Aeluin, the first whisper, the first breeze to rise from the world below and curl into the sky. The name was not hers, but it was part of her. A current from long ago, once kept, then lost. She rose slowly. As she stepped away from the stone, the wind followed. It wrapped around her shoulders, not pulling, not pushing, just being. She could feel it now, clearer than before. It had not been taken by force. It had returned to something older than memory. A place, perhaps. A voice. A need. And if it had a name, then it had a home. She turned her gaze eastward, where the land faded into mist. And the wind, light and restless, moved with her. She walked until the trees thinned and the land grew quiet. Here, the sky felt close, closer than before, like it had folded downward to listen. The stars were not yet visible, but the air shimmered as though they waited just beneath the surface. A meadow opened before her. Wide and low, blanketed in silver grass that bent in waves despite no breeze. At its center, A ring of old stones rose from the earth, their edges worn smooth by wind and time. Between them, the air pulsed softly. She stepped into the ring. The wind changed. It did not whisper or hum. It held its breath. And then, without warning, a sound rose. It began as a low hum from the earth, gentle, resonant, like the first note of a long-forgotten lullaby. The grass quivered. The stones shivered. Above her, the sky rippled, as if stirred by a hand unseen. It was not song, not yet. But it was the beginning of one. A song the winds remembered. A song of arrival. Aeluin, the name breathed again, pulsed within the hum. The wind-keeper stood still, her wings half open, her cloak trailing in the grass. Feathers drifted gently from her shoulders, slowly, willingly, like birds returning to the branches they had missed. And the wind circled around her, not to leave, but to gather. The meadow exhaled as the wind-keeper stepped beyond the stone ring. The hum faded, leaving behind a stillness rich and full. The breeze, which had followed her like a thread unspooling, now flowed with clearer purpose. It wound through narrow hollows, across low hills, into a forest where the trees grew slanted, shaped by centuries of gentle pushing. She followed without hesitation. Here, the wind did not guide with force, it led with longing. Every shift in the air, every rustle of grass, was a note in a melody that seemed only half remembered. Her feet touched the earth lightly, her wings relaxed behind her. She was not flying. She was walking with the wind. The trees parted. Beyond them lay a ravine, not steep, but deep, filled with swirling mist that pulsed with faint blue light. From the center rose a single tree. Old beyond measure, its bark was smooth and silver, its branches feathered not with leaves, but with long strands of air. She stepped to the edge. The breeze gathered around her ankles and rose gently, lifting her from the ground as if she were no heavier than a breath. It carried her down. And as her feet touched the moss at the tree's base, something changed. The air grew warm. The mist softened into brightness. The wind that had scattered and disappeared from Eralis now returned, one by one, like scattered pages finding their book again. And then, a voice. Soft. Timeless. Aeluin. The wind spoke her name, not the name of a stranger, but of a part of herself long buried in sky. She had not kept the winds. She had been called by them. The tree's silver strands began to sway, not from breeze, but from music. It started in the roots, deep beneath the moss and stone, where the first winds once curled into being. The melody rose slowly, like mist warmed by morning. It passed through bark and air and sky, unfurling around the wind-keeper like a memory finally spoken aloud. It was the song of the wind's return. She listened, eyes half closed, as the currents gathered, soft and sure. They brushed her cheeks, her wings, her heart. Each gust held a voice she remembered, the hush from high mountaintops, the sighs of quiet fields, the swirl from ships at sea. She wept, not from sorrow, but from stillness. The winds had never truly belonged to her. She had been chosen to carry them, for a while. To listen. To hold. But now, they had come home. The tree pulsed with light, and the winds gathered at its crown. The sky above flickered with soft stars, though it was not yet night. One by one, her feathers, those that had fallen, those that had frayed, lifted gently into the air. They did not return to her. They joined the wind. The wind keeper smiled. For the first time, she understood her purpose was not to possess the air, but to keep it until it remembered itself. And now, it had. She knelt at the base of the tree, her wings folding softly behind her. And the wind sang on. The winds did not vanish. They did not scatter, nor rush away. They simply settled, into the hollows of trees, the folds of hills, the curves of forgotten paths. They became part of the world again, not as secrets, but as presence. The wind keeper remained beneath the silver tree, her eyes closed, her breathing even. Around her, the softest breeze turned, circling like a lullaby without words. She no longer held the wind. She was held by it. Her wings were lighter now, their feathers no longer burdened by duty. Some had returned to her, not out of need, but out of affection. Others had drifted into the sky to find their own stories. And she, once watcher and warden, sat in stillness, not lost, not alone, but complete. The silver tree shimmered above her, branches gently moving even when the air was still. From it drifted a faint glow, neither magic nor moonlight, but something older, remembrance. She reached into her cloak and withdrew her wind book. The pages turned without her touch, stirred by the soft breath of the world. On each page, faint ink appeared, notes not written by her hand, but by the winds themselves. Places they had seen. People they had touched. Silences they had carried. Stories they had whispered. She smiled. And closed the book. High above, the sky opened like a great feather, spread across the heavens. And Aralis waited. When she returned to the sky, the clouds bowed in silence. The spires of Aralis shimmered softly, no longer restless. The wind globes on her shelves pulsed with light, not locked, not sealed, but breathing gently. Each breeze had returned with something new, some carried stories, others silence. A few simply curled up inside their globes and slept, at peace. The wind keeper's tower felt different now. It no longer felt like a sanctuary, but like a home. She walked slowly through its rooms, touching each globe, whispering to each breeze. Not commanding, not binding, just greeting. Some responded with a swirl of light. Others with a soft song. Above her, the air shimmered. A chorus of small winds wove between the towers, gentle, joyous, complete. The city, which had once grown tense in its hush, now breathed fully again. Banners fluttered. Petals drifted from floating gardens. Children laughed in the distance. And from the tallest spire, a wind spiraled upward, painting music into the sky. The wind keeper stood at her window. One final feather drifted from her cloak. Not falling, not lost. Just released. It danced on the breeze, then vanished into light. She closed her eyes. And the sky, at last, sang. Beneath an old cottage, tiny cups wait for moonlight to stir them. But when the glow does not come, one chipped teacup dares to find it. Beneath the wooden floor of an old ivy-wrapped cottage, where the air smelled of dried flowers and quiet stories, there lived a town no larger than a platter. It was made of old porcelain, cups with faded flowers, saucers chipped by time, sugar bowls with their lids askew. This was Teacup Town, and it stirred only when moonlight arrived. Each night, like a ritual, thin beams of silver light would slip through the cracks in the floorboards. They'd fall upon the porcelain rooftops, waking the town with a soft shimmer. Cup handles would twitch. Teaspoons would clink in their holders. The scent of distant tea leaves would rise like memory. But this night was different. The light did not come. The beams never reached the sugar paths, nor lit the glinting spoon lamps by the square. The air remained dim. Still. Waiting. Inside a gently curved teacup painted with lilies and lined in rose gold, a spoon tapped gently, once, then twice. The tap echoed, thin and uncertain. Then came a whisper. The moonlight has not come. Across the town, saucers tilted, and sugar cubes stilled mid-roll. Nothing moved. Teacup Town could hum and dream only with moonlight. Without it, the streets felt hollow, like stories missing their final lines. It was not fear that filled the quiet, but bewilderment, as if the sky had forgotten its part in the song. And somewhere, deep in the heart of the town, the spoonkeeper stirred. At the very center of Teacup Town stood a tall sugar shaker, its lid dented but dignified, its windows cut from jam-jar glass. It glimmered when the light came, but now, in the dark, it sat quiet and thoughtful. Within lived the spoonkeeper. She was older than anyone could remember, slender and curved from years of stirring moonlight into dreams. Her surface was dulled with grace, and her handle bore a groove where time had rested. When the moonlight failed to arrive, she felt the stillness first. With a soft metal creak, the spoonkeeper descended her sugar ladder. Her footfalls rang gently on the saucer streets. Her cloak, stitched from teabag threads, swayed behind her. All across the town, other porcelain folk peeked from behind lids and leaned from their shelves. At the golden-rimmed plaza, a wide saucer turned town square, a few brave cups and cutlery had already gathered. "The sky must be broken," whispered a teaspoon. "The stars have gone to sleep," said a butter knife. "No," the spoonkeeper replied, her voice warm as steam, "the moon is not gone. It has simply forgotten. And when something forgets, it can be gently reminded." Heads tilted. Porcelain clinked. A quest began to brew. And as the quiet deepened, a single spoon tapped once more, soft, certain, and full of purpose. Of all the porcelain souls in Teacup Town, none were smaller, or more chipped, than Min, a teacup barely large enough to hold a thimbleful of tea. Her glaze was faded to a soft blush, and one ear had been broken long ago and glued back with sugar paste and care. She lived on the lower shelf, tucked between an old sugar bowl and a peppermint tin that sometimes muttered in its sleep. Every evening, when the moonlight flowed through the cracks, Min would sit quietly by her window and listen to the town hum. But tonight, the silence pressed in. So, when the spoonkeeper called for volunteers, voices brave enough to wander past the tea-leaf fences and out into the shadowed world, Min, quite unexpectedly, stepped forward. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A gravy boat nearly swooned. A dessert fork clattered in disbelief. But Min, small and sure, simply said, "If the moon has forgotten us, perhaps it needs someone small to remind it." The spoonkeeper nodded, her eyes warm and deep. Min was fitted with a cloak stitched from napkin corners and tucked a thimble lantern into her bowl. A tiny cinnamon stick served as a walking staff. Before she left, the townsfolk gathered, spoons offering soft words, saucers brushing rims in support. Then, with one last look at the sleeping shelves, Min passed through a narrow knothole in the skirting board. She stepped into the beneath space, where dreams sometimes fall and dust holds echoes. And the search for moonlight began. The world beyond the floorboards was soft, dark, and filled with forgotten things. Dust shimmered in slow clouds, lit faintly by Min's thimble lantern. Threads dangled like roots from the cottage's floor, and old pebbles from shoe soles lay scattered like fallen moons. Here, in this quiet beneath place, everything felt half-remembered. Min walked carefully, the cinnamon stick tapping gently ahead. Each step was cushioned by felted dust and scattered buttons. She passed a long-lost marble resting against a curled page from a torn recipe, and a feather that once lined a winter coat. These were the keepsakes of a world above, fallen through time. She paused beside a threadbare slipper. Something inside it glowed faintly, just a flicker, like a breath. Min leaned closer, lantern raised. A silver beetle, old and glinting, sat curled on a cotton scrap. It opened one eye and looked at her with curiosity. "Have you seen the moonlight?" Min whispered. The beetle blinked. Then, with a rustling sigh, it lifted one wing and pointed deeper into the beneath space, toward a place where the air shimmered like distant tea steam. Min thanked it with a bow. She followed the shimmer, past a broken clock spring and a row of quiet beads. The dust seemed to thin ahead, and the scent of lavender drifted gently in. Far off, in the still dark, a thread of silver light curved like a ribbon across the path. Not moonlight, not yet. But something that remembered it. Min followed the silver thread as it curled through dust and time, slipping between the hushed breath of forgotten shoes and the creak of beams above. It shimmered faintly, never bright, but never fading, like the trail of a memory that hadn't yet finished being remembered. The further she walked, the quieter the world became. The thimble lantern glowed softly in her bowl. Her cinnamon stick tapped out a steady rhythm on the ground, soft as a lullaby's heartbeat. Even the dust seemed to part gently for her steps. She came to a hollow formed beneath a bowed floor beam. Within it lay a cluster of old objects, an acorn cap, a sleeping spool of thread, a marble smudged with thumbprints. In the center of it all was something stranger, a door. It was small, round, and made entirely of what looked like pressed starlight, softly glowing, slightly humming. No hinges, no handle, just a single keyhole shaped like a teardrop curled into a note. Min stepped closer. Around the keyhole, faint etchings pulsed, swirls, feathers, tiny painted stars. It did not feel locked in anger, only in rest, as if it were waiting to be sung open. She knelt beside it. The silver thread ended there, tucked gently into the curve of the door like a bookmark in a book of dreams. Min reached out and placed one tiny hand upon it. The door trembled. And somewhere behind it, something stirred. Not moonlight. Not yet. But the promise of something once forgotten. Min sat beside the round glowing door, thinking quietly. The silver thread coiled softly near her foot. The air felt warmer here, dustless and calm, as though even time had stopped to listen. The keyhole, shaped like a curled teardrop, shimmered faintly. It pulsed not with magic, but with feeling, as if it waited not for a metal key, but for a note, a touch, a memory. Min remembered the spoonkeeper's voice, so soft and sure. When something forgets, it can be gently reminded. She set down her lantern and cinnamon stick. Then, with a breath deep as a tea drawer sigh, she hummed. It wasn't a song with words. It was the tune her cupboard creaked to when the wind passed through the cottage walls. It was the lull her sugar bowl sang when the moonlight warmed its lid. It was the sound of home. The door brightened. She placed her hand again upon its surface, still humming. The warmth deepened beneath her fingers. The swirls along the wood began to glow, one by one, like stars waking slowly. Then came a soft click. The keyhole melted away. The door opened inward, folding like the lid of a music box, and behind it was a tunnel of quiet silver light. It wasn't bright, but it glowed with recognition. Min picked up her lantern, now flickering with starlight of its own, and stepped through. The silver thread followed. And the dust behind her settled, undisturbed. The silver tunnel curved like a whispered question, narrow and smooth, with walls that shimmered as though made of quiet rain. Min stepped carefully, her lantern swinging in gentle arcs. The air grew lighter, not in weight, but in presence, as though the space itself had begun to remember. At last, the tunnel opened into a wide, round chamber. Min gasped softly. It looked like the inside of a great porcelain bowl, arched and glowing, its ceiling painted with faded constellations, each star a pinprick of light pulsing with breath. Along the chamber's rim stood tall glass jars, each holding a small sliver of moonlight. Some glowed strong. Others flickered. And one stood empty. In front of it, a tiny pedestal rested, bearing an unopened envelope made from folded starlight and sealed with wax shaped like a teacup. Min approached slowly. The envelope bore no name, only a single word written in swirling script, "Remember." She touched the seal. It melted with a sigh. Inside was no letter, only a feeling, soft and clear. It wrapped around her like a story spoken only once, then passed from spoon to saucer. It told of a moment long ago, when moonlight had drifted too low and become lost in silence. It had not been taken, only forgotten, by a world too busy to listen. This chamber was where it had settled. It had waited here, quietly, hoping to be sung back into the sky. And now Min had come, not with power, but with care. Min stood in the center of the glowing chamber, surrounded by sleeping light. The empty jar pulsed faintly beside her, as if waiting to be filled, not with light alone, but with intention, with memory, with song. She set down her lantern. Then she knelt. And she did not speak. She listened. The silence here was not absence, it was layered, like the stillness in the bottom of a teacup after the final sip. It held forgotten melodies, the hush of wishes not spoken aloud, and the soft weight of moonlight waiting to return. Min closed her eyes. She placed both hands on the ground, feeling its warmth. And then, from somewhere within that silence, came a sound, not loud, not bright, but true. A note. A hum. A single thread of music that wound its way through the chamber like steam curling from a kettle. Min joined it. Her voice was small, cracked at the edges, but gentle as rain on glass. And as she sang, the empty jar began to glow. Not suddenly, not brilliantly, just enough. A pearl-soft light rose within it, slow as a sunrise in a teacup. One by one, the other jars brightened in reply. And somewhere above the cottage, just for a moment, the moon blinked. Min rose from the chamber floor, her hands still tingling with warmth. The silver jars glowed softly now, none of them dazzling, none loud. Their light was quiet, like the hush before tea is poured, like the way sugar dissolves without sound. The once empty jar shimmered beside her, now holding the moon's memory in full. And it wanted to go home. She touched the glass. It lifted, weightless, and floated into the air, bobbing slightly as if eager to follow. The tunnel behind her pulsed with returning light. Even the dust in the path seemed to part with gentler grace. Min stepped carefully, cinnamon stick in one hand, the glowing jar following just behind. The silver thread curled forward like a guide. As she passed beneath the floor beam again, the dust shimmered like stars. The thread tugged softly, leading her back toward the spoon-marked path and the waiting notch in the skirting board. When she reached the threshold, she paused. For just a moment, she turned back to look at the chamber's distant glow, no longer forgotten, no longer dark. She nodded. Then she ducked back into the quiet of the beneath space. Above her, a soft groan of settling wood creaked through the cottage. A moth fluttered near the lantern's glow. Min followed the now bright thread, and the moonlight jar floated behind, singing its silent tune. Back toward Teacup Town. Back toward the night. When Min stepped through the knothole in the skirting board, Teacup Town was still. No cups moved. No spoons clinked. The town, without its light, had folded itself into stillness, as if wrapped in a napkin of shadow. But something stirred. A shimmer touched the edge of the sugar path. The petals painted on porcelain rooftops caught a hint of glow. And then, from the lantern Min held in her bowl, a single thread of moonlight curled upward. It rose gently. It brushed the ceiling beams. It touched the floorboards above, and a beam of true moonlight broke through. Silver, soft, and full. It fell upon the town square, warming the golden-rimmed saucer, where the spoonkeeper stood waiting. Her handle trembled. She lifted her eyes to the sky that lived between the cracks. The townsfolk stirred. Handles twitched. Lids shifted. Sugar cubes rolled once more. The light widened, spreading through the town like steam across fine china. It wasn't bright, it was familiar. The kind of glow that reminded every cup of why it had once been made, and every spoon of the songs it used to stir. Min stepped forward into the square, her jar of light now gently emptying into the air. The spoonkeeper smiled, her voice the softest sip. "You brought it back." And the town began to hum again. The moonlight now poured gently into Teacup Town. Not in torrents, not all at once, but in waves, soft as velvet, warm as old tea. It slipped through cracks in floorboards like it had always belonged there, curling around rooftops, kissing lids, lighting windows with silver hush. Min stood in the square, her tiny jar now empty, her lantern glowing faintly with what remained of the memory. The townsfolk gathered around her, saucers and spoons, creamers and chipped cups, watching in reverent quiet. She followed the thread, murmured a sugar bowl. She sang to the silence, whispered a butter knife. She brought the forgotten home, the spoonkeeper said. Min didn't say a word. Instead, she placed her lantern on the edge of the town square, beside a folded napkin, beneath a string of woven thread. It pulsed softly, and the light it gave was different now, not just moonlight, but memory. It would glow even when the moon turned her face away. The spoonkeeper turned to the crowd. "We cannot hold the moonlight forever," she said. "But we can remember how to call it back." A spoon tapped thrice against a porcelain cup, and a low hum rose, familiar, tender, steeped in old notes and soft-spoken tunes. The town began to sway, and laughter returned, light and echoing. Someone poured dream tea into the air, and its scent drifted up through the floor. Above, the beams groaned in contentment. And somewhere in the great moonlit sky, something listened. Later that night, when the glow had settled like a blanket across the town, Min sat quietly on the porch of her lily-painted home. The lantern beside her pulsed now and then, a gentle heartbeat of light. The spoonkeeper joined her, cloak rustling like a sigh. "You reminded the moon it was missed," she said. Min smiled. "I think it only needed a song." The two sat in silence for a time, watching as the sugar paths glittered with spilled light and laughter. A teacup orchestra tuned beneath the curved rim of a mixing bowl. A line of teaspoons danced in time to a tune only they could hear. And the moon, newly awakened, freshly remembered, shone through the floorboards with perfect softness. It was not the old moonlight. It was something kinder. Something born from being found. The spoonkeeper rose and tapped her spoon 3 times. All across Teacup Town, lights dimmed. Lids closed gently. Spoons curled beside cups. Sugar cubes sighed. The porcelain world began to dream. And in her tiny home, Min leaned into her blanket of thread and napkin and let her eyes close. The moonlight touched her one last time, warm on her rim, light in her bowl. Then it shimmered once, and watched over the town until morning.